Without further ado, we'll kick it over to Greg to kick things off and get started.
All right, great. Thanks, Matt. I'm really excited for this one. We've got the incredible, the legendary Dave Jackson on here to share his extremely pointed thoughts, and I think very expert and very thoughtful points of view. That's the kind of thing we want to do on here, and so he, in a way, he's kind of the perfect guest for this. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I want to get over to Dave, and rather than attempt and fail to do a good introduction, I'm going to hand it to Dave. Dave, who are you? Introduce yourself. I think most people know, but it doesn't hurt to give people a quick overview of who you are and where you came from.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks for the opportunity to share my prejudices. So a few things about me. I'm probably the oldest guest has ever been on this podcast. In fact, I might be the oldest guest has been on any CS podcast. So I might be of advancing age, but as my kids say, I've still not grown up, and I never plan to do that. With age comes quite an eclectic career. So I've done all sorts of things. I've done purchasing, logistics. I've done education. I've done leadership training and development. I've run my own consultancy on 3 separate occasions. But I guess my real claim to fame, if that's the right phrase, the thing that's probably taught me most about what we're going to be talking about, is that in 2000, at the height of the dot-com bust, I and a couple of friends started a dot-com company. And we've done some research. I think we were one of the first 5 SaaS companies in the UK. Before the term SaaS was invented, it was a company called ClickTools, and we were in the business of forms and surveys. So we were a competitive survey monkey. I was CEO and co-founder, grew that company for 15 years and sold it twice. So in 2010, I sold 49.9% to SurveyMonkey, and then did a back-to-back deal in 2014 and sold 100% to a company called Calidus Cloud, which is now part of SAP. We were Salesforce's first European software partner. They were also a customer of ours, and we were a customer of theirs. So we got to know them quite well. Back in 2000, there weren't webinars and podcasts about how to run a SaaS company. We had one document, which was a paper put together by Battery Venture Partners about Salesforce. And we learned quite a lot from that. And of course, we spoke quite often to people at Salesforce. Since selling ClickTools, I've done a little bit of interim work, but most of my work is around coaching CEOs and CS leaders about some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about. I like to think. I'm one of those dangerous people that thinks quite often, and I like to write. And in my spare time, I've got 5 grandkids. We're all going away on holiday on Friday. I like to paint, but I'm not very good. So that's me.
Well, I love it. That's a great overview, but I'm sure it's a tiny fraction of the many things you've done. Your advancing age is only a reflection of the incredible diversity of things you've done. I actually think it's partly that diversity that informs your extremely interesting point of view. So I've watched Dave, I've read stuff he's written, as many people have, and I sort of noticed that he doesn't say things halfway, and that's really helpful. Clarity, I think, is something that we're sadly too short of often in the way we communicate. That's not a problem Dave struggles with, and as a result, I've learned a lot from Dave. So I'm hoping today we learn a lot more. And I think we will for sure. So we had talked about doing this, and I was really thrilled when Dave finally agreed to come on here. And what we were talking about, and I want to kind of set this up a little bit, has to do with kind of what even is customer success and how does that relate to the bigger picture. And that's why I like that extensive bio, Dave, because it really helps people understand. You've experienced every part of the big picture. You've seen the whole movie all the way through to the end, and probably more than once. And that I think affects kind of the ability to step back and really think in terms of what's the bigger picture here. So bigger picture, well, okay, that's one thing. And then the other thing is, I'm fond of saying something, and I frequently try to get it in when I have a chance, which is that I don't think what we do is customer centric. Now, it's become popular, right, for companies to say they're customer centric. In fact, I don't know when it happened. You probably have more perspective than me, Dave, but it seemed like overnight, all of a sudden, some years ago, every company claimed they were customer centric, right? That was the thing to say. What had actually changed? I don't think anything material had actually changed to justify this new claim, but everyone was making this assertion, we're customer centric, almost as if it was something they aspired to be. Well, okay, but what does that even mean, right? What does it even mean to be customer centric? And I've come to the conclusion, and so I'm going to use this to kind of provoke Dave and kick this off a little bit, that we're not customer centric. If we look at the things we do, and customer success is only one aspect of it, which I want to let Dave kind of pull that one apart too, but okay, let's use that as our fall guy right now. What do we measure? Like if what's important is reflected in what we measure, what do we measure? Well, look what we measure. We measure customer satisfaction, customer retention, right? But those aren't measures of the customer's success. Those are measures of our success. Right? Customer retention is what we get out of the relationship. That's what I want is customer. That's the dollars coming in for me. The customer satisfaction. Think about that one. It's how they feel about me. I'm asking customers how they me, my company, whatever. Yeah. It's completely self-focused. It's not the empathetic, perspective of sort of magnanimous, service to humanity here. I'm asking people to talk about how they feel about me. It's almost like the most narcissistic thing you can do, right? It's like you're on a date with someone and their whole thing is asking you how you feel about them. That's not an interest in me. My point of view is, okay, we've set ourselves up to care about something which I think is really important, which is, are we really centered on the customer? But we have not fundamentally changed anything about how we interact with the customer or even how we think about the customer that would make us more inclined to think about them. I think everything we do is largely about us. So I know that's provocative, but that's exactly the kind of perspective I want to toss out there. So what I say to people is you're not customer centric. So then they say, well, what's customer centric? And my simple answer, and I'll kick this off, get your perspective on it, Dave, but my simple answer is you're not customer centric unless you're measuring the customer's results, the thing they came to get. Well, if I care about that, the least I could do is bother to check and see if they got it, right? Anyway, sure. That's kind of my kicking off. Yeah. Love your perspective on that.
There's a lot in what you've said, Greg, and I agree with it. I'm just trying to let's just break some stuff down. Let's start with one of the things you mentioned there about metrics. And I've had this dialogue with people for probably the last 8 years or so. And the question I often ask audiences is, how do what's your measure of customer success? And they come back with gross revenue retention, net revenue retention, NPS, CSAT, things like that. And I say exactly the same. They're all measures of our success, not measures of the customer's success. And I think, that little apostrophe S makes a big difference. If you think about the customer's success, then you can't say it's those things. By the way, just a word on CSAT. Satisfaction is a very weak emotion. You should be very careful about that. And if you want to put this to the test, next time your wife or your partner or your best friend cooks you a meal and you say to them, how was that? And they say to you, how was that? And you say satisfactory, you're going to get a pan around your head. Because we're not in the business of customer satisfaction, because satisfaction comes from elsewhere. And as I say, it's a very weak emotion. So we do really need to focus on how do we get the customer, and I want to unpack what the customer is a bit later on, at the center of everything that we do. And I have in terms of from an organizational perspective, I have a very simple definition, and I've used it for many, many years. So to me, being customer centric from, in terms of what the organization does, it's about everything the organization, i.e. the supplier, does to win, satisfy, retain, and grow its chosen customers better than the competition. So if you unpack that, it is about everything. So rule number one from the book on customer success is customer success is a company-wide philosophy. So what's the first thing most organizations do? They create a stovepipe called customer success. Now, there's a couple of interesting perspectives on this. One is there's a guy called Chen Zhou, who was, I think, one of the first 10 or so employees at Salesforce. He left them and went on to create a company called Zuora, a subscription payments company. And I paraphrase him, but I did look it up again today. He basically says that when a CEO is challenged with something new, the normal reaction is to create another vertical silo. And that's what we've done with customer success. That, to me, might help deliver some things that matter to customers, but that to me is not of itself being customer centric. So so it's about everything. And if it's about everything, it has to involve every team. So it's about, and if you focus on measured results, and I think measured results are absolutely key, it's how you understand the measured results that you deliver. And once you really grasp that nettle and understand that in depth, that's what you market, that's what your communications is all around in selling, that's what your product should deliver, and that's what anybody else in post-sales, professional services, customer success support should enable. So it's therefore is a true company-wide activity. There's a guy who is the CEO. He's currently the CEO of Snowflake. He was formerly the CEO of ServiceNow. Two fairly successful companies. Snowflake particular, I mean, the NRR is, I think, 150 plus. NPS is 150 plus. Growth is massive. So the CEO is a guy called Frank Slotman, and he wrote a book called Amp It Up. And there's one chapter in there, chapter 10, where he talks about specifically customer success. And I'm actually just going to read something from the book. He says, here's why he's opposed to having a customer success department. And I quote, if you have a customer success department, that gives everyone else an incentive to stop worrying about how well our customers are thriving with our products and services. That sets up a disconnect that can create major problems down the road. People become more focused on hitting their narrow goals of their silo rather than the overall goal of customer success, which ultimately drives retention, word of mouth, profitability, and the long-term survival of the whole company. That's a great definition of a company-wide approach to customer success. He goes on to add the alternate strategies to declare and constantly reinforce, the alternate to having a customer success department, this is, to constantly reinforce that customer success is the business of the entire company, not merely one department. This means that when a problem arises, every department has a responsibility to fix it. Everyone's incentives should be fully aligned with what's good for our customers. So there are people out there who've said, Frank Slotman's a danger to customer success. I argue the opposite. He's actually, I think if you put that and Chen Zhou's approach about silos, they're actually challenging us to build customer success as a company-wide philosophy. And Frank Slotman saying was actually, you don't need a customer success department to do that. In fact, that probably holds you back from becoming truly customer centric. So it's back to everything the organization does to win, satisfy, retain, grow. So that's the complete customer life cycle. Profitably, it's always been important. The last 12 months, people have just recognized how important it actually is. We've come back to some sanity in terms of investments and business models and the importance of profitability. Target customers, your chosen customers is part of my definition. So, we'll perhaps talk about ICPs and why they're so important. And the last bit is better than the competition. And in my view, the competition quite often is not other people offering the same sorts of products and services that you do. The competition is your customer's mind share. Is what you are solving for more important than other things? And the best way to prove that being the case is, what's your favorite phrase, Greg? Showing them measured results. Measurable improvements in their performance. So that's why I think, that's to me is what customer centric is. It's about taking the concept of understanding who your target customers are and building the whole of your go-to-market model, the culture, the value proposition around that. And I
Love
think
it.
part of my advantage is I've never actually been a head of CS apart from interim roles. I come at this from a CEO perspective. And by definition, the CEO has to take that broad view. And I always used to say to my leadership team at ClickTools, when you come to a leadership team meeting, you are there as a member of the business management team first. You're not there just to represent your silo. You have to think about and make decisions about what is best for the company, given the context that you're in at that point in time, rather than what your own department just needs. And that's a big step for people to take. And a lot of people don't make that successfully. And, back to Chen Zhou's things, if you've got silos, Slotman's saying the same thing. If you've got silos, you focus on your silo. Well, that immediately builds friction into the organization, which customers often suffer from.
I love it. One of the things that this connects to is a theme we hear all the time, which is, okay, we've got customer success, I'm running it or I'm part of it. Why doesn't everyone else care about it, right? Well, yeah. Precisely in some cases because you exist, right? That's one part of it. But the other thing is, okay, fair enough, but here we are working on something that everyone should care about, and it almost immediately becomes obvious that our success in doing so is inseparable and from the involvement of all these other actors, right? And so, I found myself, I was a CEO too, to begin with, but then became really obsessed with this whole thing and got pulled into it and love it. But yeah, first thing I find is myself running around the company, shaking people by the shoulders saying, don't you know how important this is? And don't you understand your role? Well, no, they don't actually. And how did we get here, Dave? Like, how did we end up in this situation? What's the background on this?
I think the background is, there's probably two parts to answer. One is a little bit practical, the other one is philosophical. In terms of practical, it is that we just take that approach that Chen Zhou thinks. We think if we've got a problem, well, we'll create a specific team to deal with it. The other thing is, this is partly where it borders on the philosophical. One of the things that Slotman says in that chapter is, I think the chapter's titled about aligning incentives around customer success. If you incentivize people on something very narrow, that's all they'll focus on. And that, therefore, and I remember working with an organization where marketing and sales were at each other all the time. The reason that they were so in conflict was because their metrics were in conflict. So one of the things we did at ClickTools, we did some work around ideal customer profile and customer lifecycle. But one of the things, we also put everybody on the same bonus scheme, everybody. Not just salespeople, not just CS people, not just people with commercial responsibility, everybody in the company. And that bonus scheme was based on revenue growth times a measure of customer success stroke satisfaction. And the reason I did that was because we've got into this habit is, I'm not sure they're quite the right word, this mindset that salespeople and CS people need to be compensated for generating revenue. Well, I'd love it if they could, Siri just popped up and said something to me. So it threw me a bit.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's my fault. Yeah, we've got this view that only certain people can be compensated and it makes a difference to them. Well, there's two problems with that. One is, I'd love to see a salesperson sell something if product hasn't built it. Or if finance aren't collecting the money, you're going to go out of business pretty quickly. And the other thing is, what is it that says, well, these people are driven by money, but everybody else is not? And by the way, all the research into individual compensation says it only works in the short term. So if you look at the work of people like Daniel Pink and others, and you look at intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, that doesn't cut it. I think the more philosophical part is, why do we get into this silo focus, I think actually goes back something like 200 to 300 years, because I'm not that old, by the way. I'm old, but I'm not that old.
I was going to say, how were times back then, Dave?
Yeah, but I am a student, and a student of management. And if you look at when management appeared, it was when in the UK, the Industrial Revolution started in the 1700s and took off in the 1800s. And all the predominant models, so it was a time where the scientific method, the mechanistic approach was dominant. And that basically says what you do is you look at the big picture and then you break it down into little pieces. So if you look at the early students of management, the early proponents of management, like Fayol and Taylor and some of those, it was all about, well, here's the boss, they tell everybody else what to do, and you just break it all down and just do that. That's where silos started from, effectively. Well, actually, we've moved on since then, and that was great. It was great at the time, and it worked for people in factories producing stuff, but work now is completely different. Work is now much more knowledge-based. It requires much more collaboration. And science has also moved on. So one of the things that I did a few years ago was this thing about reductionism and mechanistic and scientific management bothered me a lot. So I've got a few questions for people on the, listen to think about. Who is the architect of a termite mound? So termite mounds, I don't know if you've ever seen them, big, very, very complex, very, very rich structures in terms of what they do. Who's the architect? Who owns the blueprint? Here's another one. Who tells a bee where to go for food? Which fish says to the rest of the shoal of fish, let's change direction? So if you look at these more natural models, and by the way, knowledge work is based in people. AI might change that a little bit, but it's at the moment. So we probably need something which is more naturalistic. So that's a philosophical view. We need to empower people much more. We need to break down those silos and focus not on ownership and structure and silos, but on what joins us together and how we collaborate. So there's a practical thing, there's a philosophical thing. Chen's got it right. We just meet each new challenge by creating a new silo.
Right. And it makes a lot more sense too when you think in terms of this particular distinction between specialized tasks we assign people to do relative to customer success and the outcome we're all trying to achieve. That's the difference, right? So one of the models that I like to use is like an infantry versus a special forces. With infantry, you don't give them objectives, you give them tasks.
No, exactly.
You just do this, march in this line toward that direction.
Yeah.
With special forces, I'm not going to tell you how. I'm going to tell you what the objective is, and your skills will be deployed in judgment to figure out how to get there. That distinction, I think, is really profound. What organizes those natural systems are target outcomes, right? That's how they can self-organize. It's not a clear set of communicated tasks. It can't work that way.
Yeah. Can I reinforce that? Because I can't remember which army it was, whether it was the British or the US Army, but there's a great saying that they use, is that they don't want soldiers to follow orders. They want soldiers who can understand and enact the commander's intent. Yeah. So to me, for intent, read purpose and strategy. And the other piece that's key there is values, because values say in making this happen, these guide your behavior. They don't tell you how to behave, but they guide your behavior. So I think, again, that's, even the military, which is recognized to be a hierarchical organization, is saying, actually, this is not working for us anymore.
Right.
And by the way, the more that you let people make their own decisions, you create the context and the framework, the more engaged they are, the better work they do.
Yes, absolutely. As long as there's some logic to it all, right? Otherwise it's chaos. But here's why I think this just brings me back to the thing that I get so excited about, and that is, well, this is why it shocks me how few companies systematically have made it their responsibility, have made it their objective to measure customer outcomes, to measure the results their customers get, because it's the one thing that could organize all that work across every team.
Yeah.
From marketing and sales, who, without that kind of feedback loop, essentially think their job is just to produce leads and to close them. Well, no, the purpose of all that is to have customers who stay for a long time. And this is another thing. It's like, back to your compensation thing, we pay salespeople to close, but a closing is actually not our goal. That's not our goal. We make a tiny fraction of our money because they close the deal. The vast majority of the money we make is because they stayed. I like to say they introduced them into the mall, but all the money we make will be how long do they stay in the mall and how much do they buy? So to focus that compensation reward just around that one almost infinitesimally small and irrelevant act. It's not irrelevant, but it's just so small relative to the larger picture, right?
Yeah.
So, and the same applies to marketing, same applies to product. There are ways of sort of atomizing their functions so that they, in a sense, miss the entire purpose, the higher purpose. And again, this is why I'm convinced that companies that take it on to say, we're going to measure results consistently, systematically for every customer in every period, essentially, you could think of all the different things that fall out of that. There are hundreds, there may be thousands of implications of that, but all of them seem inevitable. Once that simple first decision is made, we're just going to measure the results, because then it's like product has a new view. Oh, so this feature turned out not to contribute to results. Maybe we should build one that does contribute to results. Right. Yes. Well, marketing. Maybe we shouldn't sell the feature. Maybe we should sell the result. Yes. Sales. Maybe we should orient people toward the result they're going to get rather than the amount of stuff we're giving them. That it realigns everything.
Absolutely, and it's back to this concept that if you are truly customer centric, what you're talking about is actually embedded in each part, each department. You'll have departments, I accept that fully. But unless you create, unless the CEO creates the environment in which there is that shared sense of understanding of what really matters to customers, how it's measured, it won't happen. And by the way, I did say earlier on, I want to talk about customers. I don't think customers are important. And I want to say why. Because actually it's all about people. Customer success is wrongly named. It should be people success. Because if you think about it, when you talk about measurable results, a lot of people focus on the ROI for the company, but probably you're going to get more influence by saying, how do I make Matt successful? How do I make Greg successful? How do I make Dave successful? And I think, one of the chapters of the book that I wrote around customer-led growth is it's about people, not customers. So I think part of the challenge is you've got to get down from this, here's our target customers. Well, to me, an ideal customer profile's got three pieces. Who are the companies that you're targeting? That matters. But I think the most important part is what I call role profiles. Some people call them personas. I'm not a fan of that because of it's Henry from Leeds who likes to go shooting at the weekend and stuff like that. There's just a baggage that goes with personas in some cases. So I talk about role profiles. And role profiles are who are the people who are key in buying, using, and exploiting our products or services. And what's their job? How are they measured? What do they worry about? Where do they turn to for help and advice? And you've got to really get into depth into that. And I think a lot of organizations, quite frankly, can't be bothered to do the hard work that it takes. Or we'll just say it's about the customer, it's about ROI. I think it's much deeper than that. And I think the better you can understand your customers, the better you'll be. I have a saying, which is, there is a competitive advantage to be had by understanding your customers better than the competition. And that goes down to, what are the measured results that each of these key roles focus on? You deliver that, you'll get the business benefit, you'll get the repeat, you'll get the growth.
Yes. And the beauty of the role concept, by the way, I love that concept. I've always been I don't know what the word is, not totally convinced by the idea of a persona. They just seem
Yeah.
so squishy and so impossible to build real process around. But I love your idea of a role profile, because the other thing about what's the connection to benefits? Not only how do they make that person successful, right? How do they, right, roll up to their personal success? But the point is, precisely because of the siloing instinct that we have,
Yeah.
somebody owns the benefit or the result that you are providing. That person will be the most
Absolutely.
likely to get it, care about it,
Yeah.
promote it, right?
Yeah.
Value it, write checks against it, all those things. So that's really important. And I also want to comment on the ROI concept, because I'm not totally sure I like the ROI concept either. It's not wrong. The concept's right. It's absolutely right. But there's something wrong with it. And my experience is there's something weird when we go too far down the road with ROI. It's a little bit like, well, all I have to show you is that you made at least what you spent and maybe 1 penny more, and then you'll buy again, you'll renew. Actually, that's not my experience. You could even maybe make them twice what they put in. There's something about the ROI in what it implies that I don't think is really exactly how they think. And I think this connects to your idea of that role. How do I make that person successful, right? Because it's like, no, that person's not going to go into a meeting and said, we spend $1 and we made $1.01. Yay. No one's going to care. That's not how that person's going to demonstrate their value. I like to say, no, it's got to be something like 5 times what they spend. And by the way, why shouldn't it be? Why shouldn't we be in a position of producing that kind of results? Good products, good people think of ways to do that. And a lot of it has to do with their expertise. Anyway, that's just another thought I had about that.
I can't remember who said it. It was an American who said, people won't remember what you did for them. They'll remember how you made them feel. And I think the whole ROI argument misses that completely. In my experience, the people that are our best advocates are the people that we can show we've gone out a limb for to help them as individuals. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you lose that if you just focus on the customer and the ROI. You've got to get into
there's some kind of robot.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And back to my point, people are people. They're awkward, they're determined, they're engaged, they've got their own objectives. They don't want you to tell them what to do. They've got their own ideas, which they don't get a chance to put into practice. So really getting inside their heads and helping them, I think, is by far the best way to generate. Because I actually think so if I talk to you, Greg, and I start to understand you in detail, and understand how you're measured and what your challenges are, I can put together a plan alongside you to help you achieve your particular goals. That's actually probably much easier than trying to do that for the company as a whole. And the other thing, of course, it's back to this involvement and engagement. A friend of mine, unfortunately, a late friend of mine, he used to talk a lot about change. And he said there's 3 types of change. They're all appropriate, but they're in different circumstances. One was change to. I'm going to tell you what you're going to do. One was change with. I'm going to tell you what to do, but I want you to help me shape it in that. And the other one was change by. And change by is you figure out what you need to do. You drive the change. You initiate the change. Mm-hmm. And change to is very necessary if the ship's sinking. If you've got, there's no time to have a discussion. You just got to say this, let's get on and do it. But if you've got a fairly steady state organization, the more you can enroll people in, and by that I mean the more you can get them to be responsible for and taking decisions about how they do their work, the more engaged they're going to be, the better results you're going to get. There's a company I know in London. They're a training and company, and they have this concept of pre-approved decisions. Because Henry Stewart, the guy that founded the company, says one of the biggest problems is in most organizations, you have to go to the manager for approval to do something. So he said, and that, it saps at engagement. It takes time. It leads to a lot of discussion where you could actually just get on and do it. So he introduced the concept and the practice, and they actually teach this now to other companies, of pre-approved decisions. You want to make a change? Assume you've got approval for it. And there's a great story about Bill Gore. Do you remember the Bill Gore who founded Gore-Tex?
Oh yeah.
The Gore
Yeah.
company. And he talked about empowerment, and he said, I liken it to a ship. And on every ship, there's what they call the plimsoll line. And the plimsoll line designates where, give a certain load, this is where the water line would be. So Bill Gore said, actually, if it's above the water line, if people want to make changes to the ship, it's not really, it might make it a bit slower, it might make it a bit uglier, but it's not going to sink it. It's not fatal. So, go ahead, do what you think you need to do. If there's something that's going to affect something below the waterline, and he talked about what examples about what that might be, then I want you to consult people, because it's not, that is mission critical, that is company critical. So he said, my job as a CEO is to help position where this waterline is. And his view was the lower you can get it, the better it is. If you look at all the modern yachts and speedboats now, actually, none of it's in the water. It's all above the water. But Gore said, and I heard him talk about this at a conference, he said, the problem is, and he was talking about American CEOs, most American CEOs draw the plimsoll line, the water line, just below the funnel. In other words, there's no scope for anybody to do anything. And I think, in customer success, we've got to give people that freedom. Well, that's not just customer, in any part of the organization. We've got to give people some guidelines. We've got to give them some context. We've got to give them skills and training. We've got to give them the right sorts of incentives. Excuse the language, but I remember talking to an MD of a parcel company in the UK. He said, Dave, business isn't difficult. You find great people, you give them the right tools and information to do the job, and you get the fuck out of their way. And I think we don't do enough of that. We get them in their way.
But I know why, because actually what he just passed off as the key to enabling people is really hard work. And my opinion is, and I knew this to be true whenever I've been in leadership and I've held myself to that expectation. I've realized, well, they can't do it because I haven't set up this possibility. I haven't opened up this channel. I haven't enabled them with this right authority. I haven't trained them on this skill. They don't. In other words, I can make a really long list of things that are actually on me, and now absolutely. I'm much more conscious of that, right? And I feel like to some degree, even looking back at my own leadership and looking at people I work with, it's a lot more work than we think it is, right? Because setting that framework up is not trivial.
It's not trivial, Greg, but I think it's perhaps easier than we often think. So what does that framework look like? That framework looks like vision and values. That's the start of it. Company-wide, crystal clear clarity on value proposition, which basically says, how do we enhance the jobs, the work, the lives of the people that we serve? And then there are three fundamental frameworks, I think, that can shape the rest of it. One is ideal customer profile. So that's target companies, role profiles, and the third is what I call situational factors. What is it that triggers somebody to want to act? The other second of those frameworks is what I call the customer blueprint or life cycle. It's a very high level, it's not a customer journey, because they're a waste of space in my book. And if anyone wants to argue, I'll quite happily take that one on. It's a very high level view of the journey that the buyer and the customer goes through. And it's written in words that they would recognize. And then you start to say, okay, well, if that's what they're trying to do, how do we help them? And that's all you do. And so you create that high level architecture. You just say to the individual teams, here's the architecture. Now go away and fill in the plumbing. Marketing, do your bit. But if you've got ICP and you've got that overall architecture, they know that gives them the framework in which they can design their detailed actions and plans. And the third piece of that is company-wide incentive metrics. So again, Slotman talks a lot about, part of the problem is that we focus so much on silos metrics, we don't look at what we're trying to achieve as a company as a whole. So there you've got to get at things like, and these are internal metrics, customer lifetime value to CAC ratio, NRR. I'd love to see a way where we can put percentage of customers achieving measured results into that.
Yes, absolutely. And
I'm working on that.
This is huge too. Okay, good. Well, so am I. And I think that's huge because, you know, people just getting down to practical bits. What I love about your frameworks is those are things I can just go do, right? These are not 800-page documents. I can come up with this blueprint. I can define my ICP, although I don't think there's any question that the way companies do that is wrong, or at least partly wrong and very problematic. So that's something I also want to dig into. But at least those are things that are like, okay, this isn't that, like you say, it might be hard work, but it's not complicated. It's not a mystery. It's a matter of discipline in some sense, right?
Yes.
That we're going to build these as rails, as process that we can ride on, and everyone can ride on. And I'm so glad you're getting to metrics, because one thing we know from our research is that the biggest and most strongest signal predictor of long-term retention is whether customers have any measurable results. Now, you know, if I say it's results, everyone nods and they're like, yeah, okay, you're right. It's results. It's not satisfaction. Although ironically, 5 minutes ago, everybody thought it was satisfaction, but fair enough. People are really getting this, and it matches their experience and their intuition. So yes, absolutely. Okay, fine. But then it's like, well, okay, obviously, so better results, you know, matter, and they do matter. In our data, it's clear that the more customer results they receive, the better, the longer they stay. But here's the interesting thing. The biggest jump is from no measurable results to any measured results. And in fact, we even have a study we've published that shows that if you measure results and show them to the customer and they're terrible, those customers still stay more than twice as long as customers who didn't measure, who might have actually gotten good results. So there's something about just stepping into the arena, just saying, we're going to put a flag down. We're going to take responsibility for these measurable results. We're going to build all our rails on that. That just starts to enable the rest of this to make sense. And then I want to bring that back to the ICP thing, because fundamentally my argument is the ideal customer profile isn't who you think best loves your system or could use it the best. It actually, none of that means anything. And one way I like to say it is, it's not who you can make the most happy, it's who you can make the most money. Right. And that,
I would say successful rather than money.
Yeah, whatever.
Money's not the only measure of success.
It's intended to be provocative a little bit, because it reminds us that no, there's a measurable outcome. No matter how happy they are, they will eventually cancel if the thing doesn't produce measurable outcome, right? And I like your distinction between the company and the role. I could make a company a lot of results, but it won't matter if there isn't someone who personally cares about them and benefits from essentially promoting those results, right?
I mean, let's be quite honest, Greg. I would suspect that 90% of people that use the products and services that are offered by members of our audience don't give a toss about ROI. Doesn't affect them. What they want to know is, does it help me do my job better? Can this save me time and means I don't have to work at night? Can I get off on holiday and would not have to worry about everything else? They're not, you know, ROI's it's an important concept, but we put too much importance on it quite often.
Yeah, I don't think people renew for ROI. I think they renew because they have a sense, a justifiable sense that it's made their life better, made their work better, made them more effective.
Listen, people are selfish, you know, let's be honest. They want, you know, what it's doing for everybody else that's nice. That's altruistic, but what the hell, what's in it for me?
Here's another thing that I want to put to you that relates to this. I'm really interested in, because I've encountered it. Everybody I work with encounters it. So it's a really common question, but it kind of comes down to, okay, fair enough. If I had an unlimited amount of time to get to know each customer and, you know, dig into their soul and find out what makes them, you know, successful and how to promote sure, I could do everything you guys are saying, but the reality is we have to do this at scale. in many cases, my clients don't have humans even to interact with every client. They've got to figure out how to make this thing we've described happen at scale. And one of the things you said, I want to come back to, because I think it's the key. And that is that, well, when you've defined your ICP, you'll know there's only so much real scope, right? Another way to say it is your product only does so many things, right? It may sound like a lot when you're describing the features, but when you reduce it to results, outcomes, measurable results, there's not that many, right? In many cases, there's one. And a lot of companies I work with have one, and maybe it's two. Maybe in a really complicated company, there's 3 key measurable results, any one of which would be a compelling reason to renew. But that's frankly, that's unusual. And so reducing it to this pathway you talk about, you didn't call it that, blueprint, and the ICP allows us to consolidate our understanding and build processes around that can scale. Talk about that. How do we scale this point of view?
Well, one thing about scale to start with, and that is that if you have a well-defined ICP, the chances are that those role profiles probably are descriptive of anything between 60 and 80% of the individuals you're going to meet. And part of the reason, by the way, that people like suppliers and SaaS companies is because you can tell me what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
So there is if you've got a well-defined ICP, almost by definition, you have a set of characteristics which will be common across all of them. So that gives you the basis on which you can scale. The 20% there, which are different, they're the really interesting ones. They're the ones that CSM should be focused on. So we build our product. By the way, my main focus is B2B SaaS. In B2B SaaS, if you start a B2B SaaS company, please understand you are starting a product company. And therefore, most of what we're talking about should be built into the product. And I think one of the problems that we've got in SaaS is we build products the wrong way. We build products thinking about features. We don't build products thinking about what is the path to measurable results for these different key roles. And you'd end up with quite a different product. In fact, I was having dinner with a CEO that I used to work with last night. And I remember saying to him, "Oh, do you remember that piece I did for you on goal-oriented product?" And basically all I did was use a wireframe tool to actually spec that said, goals and outcomes as a separate menu item. And all you did is say, I'm in this role. Out of these results that I want to improve, which one I want to start with? And then, okay, based on that, then these are the features in the product that you need to be focused on. And here's a set of guides and help that you can do. And by the way, here's a dashboard. It's in the product. So that's how you scale it. The product is the first vehicle that you should think about when you are seeking to scale a company, a SaaS company. And
okay, now I'm going to do something that might provoke you. So I'm welcoming to all responses, but I almost want to start with an attempt to redeem CS. Okay, so you started with, where the heck did this thing come from? Why did we think siloing it off would do any good? Absolutely right. Well, okay, but here's something that CS can do and probably doesn't. In most cases, they don't think this is part of their fundamental mission, but I think it's powerful. And that is to say, here's things that if they were in the product would reduce the amount of variability and failing, that would make a result easier to both achieve and to measure and to materialize and all that stuff. That's a job they can do. And I think that's something that we haven't tasked CS enough with. Now you could take the same point of view and you could say, well, what about this ICP thing? Who's going to figure out?
Can I just answer that first piece?
Yeah, go. Yeah.
The answer to that first question is, that's the job of a product manager. So if you go back to Slotman's view, he would say...
That's just another silo, right, Dave?
Well, exactly. Well, it is in a way, yeah. But if you... So what Slotman did is he closed all his CS departments and literally says, I put people back into the departments they came from and where their capability is best suited. And this CEO I was talking to last night, I remember him saying to me, how come, we need to scale massively. How can we scale CS? How many CS? And his question was, how many CSMs do you need next year? And what do we need to put in the budget? And I went away and thought about that and said to him, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 3 CSMs, but in return, I want 5 engineers. Because we could productize much of it. And by the way, a lot of what you productize is relatively low value work, which if you talk to anybody, it's, oh God, I've got to do that again. I've got another QBR. Oh, I've got another checking call. It's boring stuff. Right. So I think, I think not only do we scale, but we then, the work that's left, it becomes much, much more engaging. So we've got a double whammy. And one of the companies where I worked, and I was an interim there because the guy I was coaching left, and the CEO said, can you take over for a while? And I took my best CS team leader and made him into a product manager. It's a path he wanted to go down, so it wasn't a hard sell. And Matt spent his time now taking all of his knowledge about, how we deal with customers and taking all of his understanding about what value for different roles means. And the latest iteration of their product has got a load of measurable results in it. It's like there's a dashboard in the product which says, this is where you are, this is your target. Oh, by the way, if you want to fill that gap, go and look at these resources.
Right.
That's
but wouldn't you say it? But clearly, in fact, that's the only thing that scales. And one question I have is, how did he obtain the insights that led to that? I mean, he was working with customers, right? So one concern I have about product managers is they don't always have that day in, day out on the ground experience grinding through the difficulties of making customers successful. I think there's a lot of value in that.
So there is a piece there, Greg. And I'm not saying, by the way, there's not many of them, but Snowflake have got a few CSMs. They're not against that. What Slotman's saying is, I don't need a department to do it. If I get people to do their jobs properly, then we can do this elsewhere.
Totally.
And I'm not against CS departments. I'm against people who say a CS department is the only way to do CS. I'm dead against that.
Oh no, right? Yes, absolutely.
That's just lacks creativity. That's just being idle in my book.
Well, it's confining too, because you've just described CS as something the product team should actually be aggressively owning. Well, but the same thing applies to the ICP, right? So someone has to determine who that is, and to the degree that they make that an effective target in marketing and sales, you're going to reduce. So you said maybe 60 or 80% are representative of this profile, the simplification model that you've created. Well, I know how to increase that, and that is to sell more of them and fewer of the ones that aren't like that. And we can really tighten that up. That's another way to scale. In fact, almost anything we can think of that CS or someone engaged in the pursuit of customer success, to your definition, ought to do, it's to be looking for every single place where that insight can drive higher outcomes at scale. Yeah.
And this getting the whole of the company to align on and understand that ideal customer profile is key. So when we did this at ClickTools, we actually just went away for 2 days. We'd done some research before, so we got the data. We shared the data, and we said to so we've got the head of marketing, the head of sales, the head of CS, the head of product, a couple of other people, including members of those teams. And we said, we are not leaving this workroom until we've all agreed that is the ideal customer profile that we are going to target. Doesn't have to be perfect. We'll refine it. The important thing is we are not leaving until everybody agrees that that's what we're going after. Everybody. And my job as CEO was to make sure that not only did they say that in the room, but afterwards, everything they did, they could say to me, this is how it helps us meet the requirements of our ICP. So my job all the time was to just keep their nose to the wheel in terms of ICP. And water torch is a great form of communication. You keep saying it, they'll get bored of hearing it, and they'll just say, oh God, stop, I'll do it.
I love it. That is a really powerful example of how to crush this down. One of the things that I think, like if you talk to I talk to a lot of companies, they all agree that this needs to be done. They all have done something about it. But I don't know how many have done what you just described. And I think that's really powerful. I think we can stop for a moment and say, okay, yeah, there's a million things we've talked about. There's a million things we should do. But do we isolate something as important and central as that? Selling to the right customer that we can make successful as a fundamental factor in how everything else goes after that, including customer success.
Sure.
Do we ever make it that essential that we will go and lock ourselves in a room and crush it down until it exists? And that's why I say it's hard work. It's hard enough that the little bit of efforts we do here and there just aren't going to cut it. What you're describing is the way, in my experience, people really solve these kinds of things.
Yeah. And it's hard thinking work. You know, we did that and the high level blueprint in a workshop in 2 days. Was there more work after that? Yeah, it probably took us a total of 6 months to get all the pieces in place, to do the training, to get the content right, to get the metrics in place. But the architecture was built in 2 days. That's all it took.
Fantastic. Wow. I cannot
believe
believe the
time
time
and questions, Greg.
By like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do we have, I'm happy to do questions. Matt, or do we have questions in the chat? I'm happy to look at.
Yeah,
I'd love to explore anything. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to. There's one in here that I think is pretty great here. It's from.
Okay.
Let me just read this out loud, and I think that's what we can end with here. It says, "I believe the statement customer centric is fundamentally flawed, as it assumes customers know what they want and need. They don't a lot of the time. Isn't it time that we substitute it for words such as customer led, or interpreting the behaviors and emotions and aspirations of customers and delivering that? That delivers value to them and us." So the question around when and how could we substitute this for a customer-led approach rather than, customer-centric?
You probably So the book I wrote is called Customer-Led Growth, a CEO's Guide to Building a B2B SaaS Company. So Tim, I think I know Tim. I agree with you in terms of customer-led. A lot of people use customer-centric. Sometimes I don't get hung up words. Sometimes I think words are absolutely critical. But I think you're right. It is customer-led. And you're right that they don't know. And I think the great Steve Jobs once said, never ask a customer what they want because they don't know. Our job is to understand. So his job was to understand what their needs are, and you work backwards from that. And I think it's, the same is still true today.
Absolutely brilliant. This has been just as good as I thought it would be, maybe better. Absolutely cracking conversation. Thank you, Dave. Fantastic. Pleasure. I cannot say how much I love engaging in this. You are thoughtful. You have incredible stories. It's always value adding. So thank you sincerely. It's been an honor to have you on this, and I hope maybe we'll do it again sometime, because I think there's tons of territory left for us to cover. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Thanks for the opportunity, Greg, and to Matt, and enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Well, thanks to everyone who came. Let us know what you got out of this. If you have follow-up questions, please post them on our page. If you're interested in what we do, we allow you to measure. We enable it to be possible to measure carefully things like the ICP and the results that you drive for customers, and what kinds of product features and factors drive results. And all of this is available. We do a free version that I think is really useful. So please hit us up if you'd like to do this with us. It's very, very powerful. Thanks again to Dave, and we'll see you guys all next time on the next Expert Chat. Bye-bye.